Hello, fellow classmates. It's Kirsten here, and I'll be one of your week 4 presenters for our theorists, and I am presenting on Dr. Jerome Bruner. Where you may not remember his exact name, you will definitely be familiar with many of his theories. So a little background, he was born in New York City in 1915, and I found out through my readings that he was actually born blind, and he didn't actually have sight until he was 2 years old, and I have kind of wondered throughout my readings in the past couple weeks on Bruner if that had any influence on why he decided to make theories of development, for example. Undergrad degree he earned from Duke University, and then he earned his psychology PhD from Harvard directly after his undergrad in 1947. He was highly involved in the war effort. He was a psychologist, a social psychologist for learning about how the propaganda that was put out, how that had an influence on U.S. citizens. He was a co-founder and director at the Center for Cognitive Studies at Harvard University, and that is a very prominent department now at many universities that have psychology as a major. He was a professor at Oxford, and it was kind of in his time, that was pretty much his prime time for many of his discoveries. It was basically 1960 through 1980 was the bulk of his major discoveries, but he didn't stop writing, and he wrote many influential works later on in his life. He received the Distinguished Scientific Award in 1963 from the American Psychological Association, and he only died a couple years ago. I watched a video of him in 2013 when he would have been 98 years old, and he was still able to have full conversations with the interviewers. Pretty amazing. His influences: he was influenced by Piaget. He did agree with Piaget that students were pre-adapted to learning and that they have kind of a natural curiosity for learning. How he differed from Piaget was he did not believe that the stages of development came in blocks, that you had to graduate from to enter the new stage. He believed that stages of development were fluid and that they all were constantly learning and growing and changing. So, I mean, he was influenced by the stages of development to kind of counteract and show why they were incorrect, I guess. But Vygotsky, he agreed with a lot. The zone of proximal development, when I was doing my readings, I'm like, isn't that the same thing as zone of proximal development? Aren't they isn't scaffolding related to that? And yes, they are very related because Bruner was influenced greatly by Vygotsky. And they both believe that social interactions had huge impacts on learning. The theories that he developed, his main one, his theory of development, I believe this is the main one because all of these other ones flow from that theory. So the 3 stages, the fact that they are constantly intermingling and that students aren't stuck in a stage or they don't have to graduate from it, I think really contributes to the discovery learning aspect, how you're always learning and growing, and then the scaffolding, reaching beyond your current stage and then spiraling backwards and reviewing. I think that that's just another image of his theory of development, how they're constantly active, and it may not be that they're stuck in the object phase. So the early childhood would be that inactive stage, and then iconic would be linking pictures to that, and then symbolic, giving the deeper meaning and growing through language. I don't think we're stuck there, and I think that that's what Bruner was trying to get at with scaffolding and spiraling curriculum, was just stemming from his theory of development. So as I touched on just a little bit, there's a picture in the bottom of your screen where there's kind of a baby playing with a book or something, and they're touching things, so it's active or movement. And iconic being through pictures. Oh, that's a dog. That's what it looks like. Do you know what it sounds like? You know, that sort of thing. And then symbolic, we're doing research and understanding the deeper meanings behind those things in our world. And he believed that the majority of our K through 12 education is in the symbolic stage, with the language and meaning and attaching those symbols to why they're important. Constructivism. I took this information directly from that website that's down at the bottom of your screen. So a teacher designs curriculum or designs activities where the students are going to be active in the process. That's basically the base of constructivism, that the students have to construct or discover something on their own. Scaffolding. Readiness is not a term that is acceptable to Bruner. In your reading for this week, readiness is an idea that he heard teachers say a lot, like, oh, well, they're not ready for this concept, or I can't teach that because they haven't learned this yet. And Bruner just thought that was a bunch of hooey because he took a study of third graders in representation and learning mathematical learning. That's one of his prominent works. He took third graders and was teaching them how to complete a square. But he did that with scaffolding. He was using manipulatives to help them get there because they could realize that an X block looked like this and 2X blocks would be 2X. And so he was just using what they understood to get to what they did not yet know. And I think that picture of that little dude climbing the books there is kind of a good picture of that because they're all overlapping. So it's using the previous book to stack onto the next one. The flow chart that I have at the bottom of the screen there is also at the very first time that scaffolding was a word that was introduced was in The Role of Tutoring and Problem Solving by Wood, Bruner, and Ross. And in that work, they described how you need to get the students' attention somehow. So recruit their interest and then reduce the degrees of freedom they have. No, not taking their toys away and making them focus, but giving them simple tasks right in front of them to kind of break it down for them. Make sure that they're on track so they don't end up in a ditch somewhere, super frustrated and hating their subject matter, and marking critical things along the way, like, oh, this is a key word, you know, those sort of things, so that when they go back later and kind of connect everything, that they're able to pull out those main ideas. And then at the end of it all, going back and demonstrating it. Now, in the role of tutoring and problem solving, it was one-on-one. So, I mean, that made it a lot easier for their study, but as teachers and when we do whole class things, I mean, we still have to kind of be walking around the room doing that almost tutoring process. So frustration control, making sure that they, don't hate math. Spiraling curriculum. Well, if we're going to scaffold to get them to go beyond what they should be able to handle, then we need to go back at some point and make sure that they're understanding it. If he didn't like the word readiness, then we have to go back and make sure that we understand that learning is continual. And mastery is not expected until later on in schooling. So if we're going to step ahead, we also have to step back and make sure that they're still building on those previously laid building blocks. Implications of Bruner's work. Well, curriculums have been developed to include spiraling discovery learning. And I included these next two bullet points. These were not explicitly mentioned in my reading, but I started thinking, well, with discovery learning and learning how much Bruner believed that those stages of development intermingled, I think that that's probably an inspiration for interdisciplinary learning at some point, because seeing how they all connect and being in that symbolic stage, understanding how science relates with math and how, language is not separate from science, and how, we still use ideas from history to connect all three of them together. I think that interdisciplinary teaching is a really beautiful picture of that, whether some would probably argue that's not something Bruner came up with. No, it's just something that I kind of put together. Integrated math curriculums, making sure that in elementary school they're getting the building blocks of algebra. I think that that's probably a result of Bruner's work, that they can learn algebra in elementary school. Just don't call it algebra yet. Just call it like variables in arithmetic. I don't know, but they do that now. And also geometry, how my 7th graders are able to know what complementary, supplementary means. I mean, those weren't standards back in the 70s in a 7th grade classroom by any means. But I think that they've worked down because they see that learning over the K through 12 education rather than the 7th grade education is more important. It's just more important in the long run. It's an active process, and that teachers should make kids feel happy about learning so that they like it, I guess. Which, I guess that was one of our other theorists was very, very keen on the encouraging idea, which we do. We do a good job of that, guys. We do. My teaching. How am I consistent with Bruner? I would get along with he and Vygotsky with the social interaction part. I definitely have my students talking a lot. I put spiraling and discovering learning in blue because, yes, I would do that on my own, but I think I do that more because of the curriculum I have. I have the Connected Mathematics series, so it does a lot of that for me. So yes, I do that consistently, but I think that's mainly because it's in my books. But I'm so thankful that it is, because it's kind of hard to do that without curriculum that'll help you along. Scaffolding techniques, I like to question my students and push them beyond where they are. And I do believe that the stages overlap. I believe that as a teacher, we're in all three stages kind of at the same time. And that's one of your discussion questions later, or maybe I took that out. But I think I was going to make one of your discussion questions. At what points in the day do you ever have times while you're teaching where you are in the inactive stage, the iconic stage, and the symbolic stage all at the same time as a teacher? And I think that we are. Like, we learn how to do new things even as teachers. How am I inconsistent with Bruner? Well, I am in the public school setting, and I have standards that I have to address, and in a certain order, because I don't want to make the 8th grade teachers mad that I taught them the year before. Not that they would be mad, but I kind of get a little disappointed when some of the students say, well, my 6th grade teacher showed me that last year, and I'm like, darn, I was so excited. But that's okay, because I mean, that's just part of our mindset set of readiness, that I need to break out of my shell and just be excited that their 6th grade teacher ruined it for me, because then they already have a good grasp on it. And then I can't do the scaffolding process to the full potential, because in that article where it was first introduced, it was more of like a one-on-one tutoring thing. So that would be really great if all students learned really well in a 25-on-1 classroom, but they don't, and so I wish that we had more one-on-one time or small group time. The discussion questions for this week. Do you feel restricted by the idea of readiness, or do you think that the Common Core standards give some freedom in that area? Do you feel that it is still a prevalent problem in education, even though progressive teaching is once again on the rise? So readiness, you'll find that in your reading. And he expands on it quite a bit. I think I kind of gave you my thoughts, but I mean, I didn't look at it from the positive side. I looked at it as a restriction. So maybe in your school they do give you a lot more freedom. So I'd like to hear about that. On Learning Mathematics, Bruner discusses the benefits to being both a listening and a speaking learner. Throughout your K through 12 education, do you remember listening or speaking as you learned? And what benefits or limitations did that approach have on you? Maybe later on in college, did you finally realize, oh, I need to shut up and listen to the person next to me because they actually know what they're saying? Or did you think, well, yeah, I already thought of that, but I guess I should have said it sooner? As teachers, how can we encourage those students, either of the listening or speaking category, how can we encourage those students to find the balance? And I think this question goes along with his learning theory, because we're in the symbolic stage with the being able to put language and meaning with what we do. So being a listener or a speaker is kind of an important thing to identify in ourselves, so that we can be continually learning, but also contributing and sharing with those around us. So, resources. There's a bunch of them there. The On Learning Mathematics is the one that you will be reading this week. And the representation is the one with the 3rd graders, where they were learning to complete the square. The Process of Education, I printed it off, but I never actually got to read it. The Culture of Education, that was another one of his great works. I kind of want to read that later on in life. And then, yes, Google Images. Thanks. Bye.